Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this plain old innocent Airfix Beetle. Okay, the title and thumbnail probably give away the surprise a little bit. I am going to do a brief review of this Airfix Beetle starter set. I figure why not show how the kit goes together and give my thoughts on it, but after that, I'm going to turn it into a fierce fighting machine using stuff from my bits box. This is one of the reasons I even have a bits box to begin with. Looking at the front of the box, we can see that this is indeed an Airfix Beetle starter set with a picture of the car in question. Quickly looking at the back of the box, we can see that this is an officially licensed Volkswagen product. I wonder what they would think of my modifications. There's also images of the front, rear, and left side of the car, and painting instructions. As you might expect with a starter set, this comes with some of the things you will need to put it together. They assume that you have your own sprue clippers and knife. The instructions don't mention such tools, though they probably should, even if none are supplied. So what do we get in the box? As you can see from the front, you get a tube of Humbrol poly cement. I don't really like tubes of glue, I tend to make a big mess with them, but this might be useful to have on hand. No sense in throwing it away. There are also 6 small tubs of paint. The box does state that there are 4 acrylic paints, so I don't know what the deal is here. Are 2 non-acrylic? It's a mystery! I'm not sure what I will do with them. I assume they're just the regular Humbrol paint, which I have not used. I may test them out if anybody is interested in that kind of thing. There is also a small decal sheet with a few number plates to choose from, and these 2 brushes. Nothing fancy about them really, just some basic synthetic brushes. Nothing fancy like Sable. They are size 0 and 4. I will add them to my collection of brushes. They'll be useful one day. Let's have a quick look at the parts. I don't really know much of anything about cars, so I can't really speak intelligently on what the parts are. I was surprised at the number of parts this kit has though. Not that more parts is a problem for me. The details on the parts are fairly good. Again, not really knowing exactly what they should look like, they look fine to me, though there is quite a bit of flash and some parts will need a fair bit of cleanup before they can be attached. The clear glass parts come in a separate bag, though for some reason I forgot to film it. The instruction sheet is quite large and mostly taken up by a couple of paragraphs of information about the Beetle in various languages. The instruction diagrams themselves only take up 2 pages. I found them clear enough and easy to understand and follow. At this stage, I also went through my bits box and picked out the major items like guns. You can of course always search for odds and ends like chunks of armor as you go. You can see my bits box is more of a set of drawers really, but it's nice to keep the parts organized. I was actually quite tempted to try mounting the Beetle onto the spare track sets from Rubicon's T34, but I decided against it. It didn't look like it would quite work as I would like. Perhaps next time I will do something like this. Eventually, I found a few things to start with, mostly stuff from Warlord and Rubicon kits, as well as a lot of weapons from Warhammer 40k tower models. Also, what looks like some Soviet fuel tanks and an MG34 from some larger kits. I might not use all of this stuff, but it's a good start. Before we get to the fun part, we have to actually put the Beetle together. Not to say that isn't fun too, but, well, who doesn't like guns and spiky bits? The parts of this kit do have a fair bit of flash, so it is a bit of an effort to clean them up. A lot of the parts in the undercarriage I just cleaned up very roughly, if at all. A lot of them won't be visible. The parts don't need to be perfect. I'm not going for a factory new look for this model. It just needs to not look like a plastic kit with mold lines all over it. Some of the parts didn't quite fit together right, like this part where the pins wouldn't fit into the mounting holes. This was easily solved by expanding the hole with my knife. The part then fit nicely into place and I secured it with plastic cement. As I follow the instructions, this part seems to be next. It's the front suspension and steering part. It's quite messily moulded and again I had to clean up the mounting holes to get a good fit. I didn't clean the part up too much. It's likely to be well hidden by wheel. I simply glue it into place and move on. Next I add some suspension and wheel holdy bits. That's the technical term, just so you know. The shock absorber part goes on between the frame and the wheel holdy bit. I didn't bother cleaning up these parts much at all. It was a little bit fiddly, but not too hard to get done. Next comes this part, which I'm guessing represents the transmission and of course the rear axle. Pretty unlikely to be visible, so the mold lines were only very roughly scraped away. It's easy to place, just press down until the part clicks into position. The rear suspension-y parts are assembled in a similar way to the front ones. Not really worth cleaning up the bits. I guess a lot of them are meant to be cast metal or something anyway, so they'll look a little bit rough. It is now time for the wheels. Again, not being an expert on Beetles or cars in general, this tyre looks fine, apart from the fact that it has no grip. There is a mold line, though compared with some of the others on this kit, it's pretty minor, and since there is no grip, just scraping the outside of the tyre smooth with my knife is a quick and easy way to fix this. Now to attach the wheels. They don't quite fit directly onto the axles. That's why there is this pin kind of thing. A spacer? I'm not sure what you would call it. It goes in the center of the wheel and holds it in place. It doesn't fit too tightly, you can still wobble the wheel around, but it does get the job done. I added a little extra glue here to keep everything secured into place. I was hoping to leave one or two of the hubcaps off, but I'm certain these wheels don't look at all realistic, so I feel there isn't much choice but to put hubcaps on all 4 wheels. Speaking of hubcaps, they look a little bit too perfect. They will need to be all scuffed up and dented. I thought I would experiment a little bit. I used a lighter to heat up the end of a sculpting tool. The idea here was to melt dents into the hubcaps. Unfortunately for the most part, I managed to do this work completely out of frame, like a dingus. But you get the general idea. If you're going to try this, be very, very careful. Burns aren't fun. I didn't quite get the result I was hoping for, but I'm sure this method could be refined. Maybe a better choice of tool would help. I clean up the areas of melted plastic with my knife. It doesn't have to look perfect. The idea here is to get rid of the lumps of excess plastic that rise out of the melted area. One of the hubcaps has a hole in it from too much melting, which I figured makes for an interesting detail, though it could always be filled in with green stuff. Also, it is a really bad idea to cut towards yourself like that. I'm a terrible person for cutting like that. Don't do it. I could have cut my thumb open and died. Or at least experienced pain and got blood everywhere, which is almost as bad. I tried adding dents by pressing down on the hubcap with the end of my knife. I managed to split the part. Not the result I was hoping for, but it looks kind of interesting anyway. I glue all 4 hubcaps into place and encountered no problems at all. I do wish I could have left a couple of them off though. Next, I put in the, well, I don't know what you would call this. It's the part that will prevent you from seeing right through the car if you were to look through the wheel arches. I test fit before the glue dries to see if it will all go together with the top half of the car. It's a bit of a tight fit, but that's okay, as long as it does actually fit. I then attach what I would call the parcel tray to the back of the rear seat, and then assemble the driver's seat. The driver's seat was quite messily moulded, but I didn't bother cleaning it up too much. The next logical step would be to glue the seats into the Beetle's frame. They are pretty easy to place owing to the raised guide pieces. I'm not going to add the front passenger seat. In my mind, they've removed it in order to provide more space for the crew to operate weapons and such. The extra seat would only get in the way. Now for a little more interior detail, I add the gear shifter and then the handbrake. You don't want your glorious battle Beetle to roll away when you park it on a hill. I then glue the steering wheel into the dashboard. Be careful here, the steering wheel part is quite thin and could easily break without too much pressure. I then glued the dashboard into place. I wasn't entirely sure I got this part positioned correctly, but then I figured it doesn't really matter anyway. It won't be particularly visible. It looks fine from the outside anyway. I carefully test fit the upper and lower halves of the Beetle. It seems to fit well enough. Obviously, I don't want to glue them together now, because we still need to access the inside of the car while adding weapons, and it will need to be primed and painted on the inside too. It's not a bad little model. If you're going for a nice, very high detailed and very high quality model of any car, you probably aren't going to be after an Airfix starter set, but it's perfectly fine for this purpose, and it would be a good place for a beginner modeler to start. I've obviously left off a few bits like headlights, door handles, window glass and so forth, but I don't need them for my purposes. I then set about figuring out my nice extra details. How do I want to attach things? This took a lot of pondering for me to figure out. I figured this Gatling gun would fit in the front because I'm pretty sure the Beetle had its engine in the rear. But how high? How low? Do I want 2 side by side or 1 in the center? Decisions. One thing I was certain about was attaching the hedgerow cutter from the Warlord Cromwell I built recently. The rounded front of the Beetle doesn't quite fit well with the part, so I made some modifications. I trimmed down the mounting pins so they would be flat. I test fit, and just as I expected, the part rolls side to side on the rounded front of the car. No big deal. I just filed the surface flat until I was happy with how the part would fit. I didn't glue it on just now because I didn't want to risk damaging it when cutting the hole for the Gatling gun. Then, I figured this little beastie is going to need some form of communication. So, what better than a radio? I cut the seat portion off the radio set from the Rubicon M3 half-track I built recently. I roughly guessed as to where I would position the radio inside the car. The antenna was obviously going to have to pass through the roof, so I drilled a hole for that, widening it with my knife until the antenna part would fit through it. Sure, I could use a bigger drill bit, but that would require me finding a bigger drill bit when my knife is right there. When the antenna fits through the hole and I'm satisfied with how I will attach the part, I apply glue and then stick the part into place. I think that's a fairly sensible location for a radio. I put the bottom of the car on to make sure everything still fits right, and it does. Also, the radio should be visible through the windows, which is cool. Then I pre-assembled some parts that I was sure I would use later, namely this fuel tank which I was sure I would mount to the rear of the car above the engine, and this gun from a Tower Crisis suit, the name of which eludes me. It looks like a minigun though, and more importantly, it looks very cool. I spent some time pondering how far back or forward I want to position the Gatling gun inside the car. Mounting it inside the car is way cooler than just sticking it on the outside. Eventually, I settled on a location to begin cutting the opening. I do this by initially drilling out a series of holes where I want the first cut to be. I use the gun part as a gauge to guess roughly how wide the opening should be, and then I take my knife and carefully cut along the drilled holes. This would have been better if I had used a sharper blade, but I didn't have any replacements on hand, which is a foolish oversight. Always have spare blades. Eventually, after some effort, I managed to create a hole in the Beetle's bonnet. That's hood for you Americans. Or maybe it's the boot, since the engine goes under the bonnet. That's trunk Americans. Anyway, I made a hole. I then test fit it with the gun part, and as I suspected, it isn't quite large enough. No problem. More cutting, hacking, and a little bit of filing will take care of that. Test fitting all the while. Eventually, I had an opening I was satisfied with. I figured it would make sense for the opening to be curved at the bottom to make clearance for the gun. I spent some time considering how I was going to secure the gun inside the car. I wish I had given it some thought earlier. I toyed around with the idea of using brass pinning rod and pinning the gun to the car body, but instead I decided to use scraps of 3.2 by 4mm styrene bar. It was quite fiddly to get positioned in such a way that I was happy with how the gun looked, but I did get there, and when I did, I added a bit more glue to be sure everything was all bonded in place. Just to be sure, I added a second piece of scrap styrene to the other side of the gun. It doesn't look so neat, but it won't be visible anyway. What matters is the gun is pointing where I want it to and is held securely in place. Next, I decided to add the hedgerow cutter, though I guess it isn't really for hedges anymore. Probably more for people or other cars. It's just a simple matter of gluing it into place and making sure it's centered and straight. I wanted it to be fairly level with the ground, so I gently adjust its angle and that's it. One fierce looking front bumper. Then I add this roof and hatch part that I very roughly cut from the turret of a Rubicon T-34. I spent a little while umming and ahhing over how I was going to position this and if I wanted to cut a hole through the roof and have the hatch open and see-through. In the end, I decided to simply stick it to the roof and build it with the hatch closed. Why a Beetle, even a battle Beetle, needs a hatch from a tank, I don't know, but I thought it would look cool, so on it goes. To support the part until I filled the not insignificant gaps with green stuff, I inserted some pieces of 1.5mm diameter quarter-round styrene that was very well covered in glue and quite melty. I then tried to attach the fuel tank. Unfortunately, the support parts aren't quite long enough to reach the body of the car, owing to the Beetle's rounded shape. The solution to this was to firstly file away a small amount of the tank in the middle to better accommodate the car's shape. Then I glued some lengths of 0.4 by 1mm styrene strips about 10mm long to the tank's attachment points just to add a little bit of height. I then attach it to the car, being careful to avoid the gap where the bonnet part would hinge to open. I did have a little bit of trouble getting it all aligned because I didn't wait for the glue on the styrene strips to set, but it was eventually all straightened up. It doesn't have to be perfect anyway. This is obviously not a factory issue vehicle, rather something people have thrown together in the field. Speaking of field modifications, I decided to glue this chunk of armor over the window in which the radio sits, mostly because the back of the radio is hollow. This piece is the dual turret top part from one of the Mini Aeron's T26s I built a while ago that I've cut down to better fit the window's shape. It's simply glued into place right over the window. Now, some protection for the front windows. For this, I'm going to use the side skirts from the 15mm scale Flames of War Pershings I got in the Grimball's Beast box. This was just a very simple matter of taking both left and right side skirts, cutting them in half, and then gluing them over the upper and lower portions of the windows. A little bit of fiddling and trimming was needed to get them just right, but this wasn't too hard. I found the best fit was the rear portion of one skirt on the upper part of the window, and the forward portion of the opposite skirt on the lower part of the window. Of course, not everyone is going to copy this, but it's a good example of how you can fiddle with the parts you do have to make something interesting. I did the same thing with the driver's side window, just for a little bit of symmetry. Next, I added some more parts from the Grimball's Beasts box. This time, the hedgerow cutters that came with the Shermans. I sort of just glued them onto the rear mudguard, though it was quite fiddly, mostly because the surface is rounded and the part is flat. I figure these can be here to deal with anybody trying to jump onto the rear of the Beetle or something. I added one to the other side as well. Then I added this. I forget exactly what this is. A marker light or something for a Tau crisis suit. It has been a very long time since I've even really thought about 40k. I glue it into place right here, trying to get it as centered as I could. Now it's some kind of camera or laser guidance system or something. I then took some air filters from the Rubicon Tiger, or rather the lower half of the air filters. I glued them into place here, just in front of the door on both sides. Symmetry is good. I'm not entirely sure what they represent, I just thought it would look interesting. Maybe it can be some component of the flamethrower system, though at this stage of the build I wasn't sure if I was even going to include any flamethrowers, but I was sure that I would need some rear-facing protection, so I glued in this machine gun, which came from the M8 Greyhound kit by Rubicon that I put together a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, that kit didn't include a second ammo box for this gun, so I trimmed down the place where that would normally go. Not particularly hard to glue into place in the rear window. This is a flamer for a Tau crisis suit. I figured I wouldn't need the entire part, so I cut a pair of them in half like so. I spent a bit of time trying to decide if I wanted the flamethrowers to face forward, which could be the easy way to add them, or if I wanted to have them facing out towards the side. I decided out to the side would be best for optimal flame spread. This required quite a bit of cutting, hacking, filing, and test fitting of the openings for the headlights. Eventually I was satisfied with the fit and glued the flamers into place. I figured this placement made at least a little bit of sense, and it might not seem as though it would interfere with the steering and suspension gear. I think they make it look really cool. I didn't let the other end of the flamers go to waste. I glued them onto the rear of the Beetle like so. I'm not entirely sure what they might represent, I just think it looks interesting. I figured a little more armor protection might be a good idea, so I cut down some Scherzen from the Rubicon Panzer III. I wanted to go on the side of the Beetle but stand off a little bit, kind of like the Scherzen on Panzers did. I added a couple of pieces of 3.2 by 4mm strip styrene as spacers. It doesn't have to be neat at all. It probably won't be very visible. I then simply glue the parts to the doors. I do try to get them fairly symmetrical with each other, as well as straight with the bottom edge of the car. It looks like the doors on this Battle Beetle could still open, though it does now look like it would take some effort. Looks pretty cool to me, though I still wouldn't want to be inside something like this while under fire. While I had that strip styrene out, I roughly cut 3 pieces to form a rough platform in the place where the passenger seat would go. I figure this will kind of look like planks or something, and it would be something solid for the commander or someone to stand on while they were hanging out of the hatch doing who knows what. At this point, I thought to myself, needs more gun. So I glued this 30 cal from Warlord's M3 half-track into the rear driver's side window. The part that allows it to clip to the side of the half-track also works perfectly for the window here too, and it looks just about right, and pretty cool too. If I hadn't blocked up both windows on the other side of the car, I'd put another one of these on the left side as well. Not only did I feel a need for more gun, but also more spikes. So I cut the knifey part from the butt of 2 Krut rifles for 40k. They had a line to mark exactly where to cut them, which was really quite helpful. I simply glued these knives over the slots that were intended for the indicators. I was considering also using the spikes from the front of the rifle, but I couldn't find anywhere to attach them that I liked. I then added the hatch. It didn't sit perfectly flat, probably owing to the rough manner in which I cut the roof part out, but that's okay. I did consider mounting a machine gun up here, but decided against it. A final detail I thought to add is a kind of protective grille over where the windshield would go. I considered using a fine mesh for this, but couldn't really find anything suitable. So I used 0.4 by 1mm strip styrene and carefully placed a series of bars across the front window. I didn't want to add too much of this because I still want to be able to see inside the car, and I wanted it to look as though the Battle Beetle crew would be able to see out too. It obviously won't protect against bullets, but this kind of grille would protect against large debris, and it would probably keep people out too. I carefully clip away the overhanging bits of styrene once the glue is set. Trying to clip them off while the glue is still wet just messes things up. Adding these small pieces of strip styrene was a little bit fiddly, but not too hard. I wasn't going for perfect, so I think I captured a hastily handmade look pretty well. Now it is time for green stuff. I mixed up a good-sized ball of green stuff. This was probably way too much. I thought I would use this much, but it's probably best to mix up smaller amounts. It is easy enough to mix more if you need it later. Make sure you have a small bowl of water on hand. Use the water to keep the green stuff from sticking to your fingers and tools. In an effort to save time, I'm not going to go too in depth about using green stuff here. It's a simple process of sticking some of the green stuff where you want it, either to build up a surface or fill in a gap like I'm doing. Using your fingers and sculpting tools, either nice store-bought ones or just bits of scrap in interesting shapes, to manipulate the green stuff into whatever shape or texture you want. If you would like to see me go into a bit more depth about using green stuff, leave a comment in the comment section below to let me know and I'll see what I can do. As you can see, I mostly focused on the area around the hatch. It's a bit rough, but I figured that's okay. Maybe they cast the part on roughly or something. It did take a fair while, but I think I got a reasonable result. I also filled in the gap between the antenna and the roof, the holes in the rear guard, and what I guess is the handle in the bonnet. You can see I pushed the green stuff out from the inside on those spots to make it a little bit easier to get the right amount of green stuff in place. I left the green stuff to dry overnight. In the morning, I neatened it up a little bit by filing down some of the bumps with a small file. It doesn't need to be perfect, I just wanted to get rid of a few of the little bumps. Then I added some final touches. Firstly, bullet holes. I did this by lightly drilling into the body of the car and then scratching away at the edges of the hole with a small round file. This makes the bullet hole look a little bit more convincing than just a hole drilled into the surface. I didn't want to go too overboard with these. I don't think a Beetle could handle too many hits anyway. I think it looks like some fairly convincing light battle damage. I also used some flat pliers to bend the edges of the wheel arches, though I forgot to film that. You should be able to see the slight bends and dents at the end of the video anyway. I quickly primed the model with Vallejo Black Surface Primer, and it's done for now. I'm really happy with how this thing has turned out, especially after it was primed. That really helps it look like a deliberately built machine rather than random bits and pieces glued together. I think it's going to look even more beastly when it's painted. I'm not entirely sure how I want to paint it. I'm thinking a lot of dark colours, lots of rust, maybe some metallics, and probably very dusty. Maybe red or blue for the Beetle itself. I don't know. I am open to ideas and suggestions, so if you have any, please leave them in the comments section below. Of course, there isn't really a prototype for this kind of thing, so there's no real way we can say if this is realistic or not, but I have tried to make it look at least plausible. If you can imagine a Beetle with a huge Gatling gun bolted into the front as plausible. In my imagination, most of the bits and pieces I added have a purpose. I imagine that this vehicle is probably more suited to fighting in the ruined streets of post-apocalyptic cities rather than out in the desert Mad Max style, though Mad Max was certainly an inspiration for this. I have been thinking of doing this kind of thing for a really long time, and it's probably one of the best reasons I can think of for keeping a bits box. I had a lot of fun using my imagination and choosing all the parts and figuring out where they should go. I would recommend everybody try something like this at least once as a little modelling and imagination exercise. If you do, or have done, I would love to see your results, so go ahead and share them. This is the kind of build where you can't really do it wrong. You can really do whatever you like. I'm kind of excited to get this thing painted, so you will probably see a video about that relatively soon. The Beetle kit itself wasn't too bad. Obviously, being in a starter set, I wasn't expecting too much. Anyone expecting a really high-end kit in an Airfix starter set is probably delusional or on drugs. I obviously left off a couple of small details like headlights, door handles, front and rear bumpers and stuff like that, but it wasn't too bad. All of the mold lines might prove to be a little bit frustrating to a beginner, but I couldn't really complain myself, and it's a good learning experience. It was actually one of the two models in this scale I found in the hobby shop. 1/32nd scale is closer in scale to most of the guns and stuff in my bits box, but it seems 1/25th scale is more common for cars. Of course, 28mm scale tank guns and such could easily be modified to fit, and obviously there's no prototype, so it doesn't really matter that much. It's just in good fun. Though it does kind of make me want to buy more 1/35th scale tanks in the hopes of getting lots more bits for my bits box. I certainly do plan to make more models like this in the future. I saw some trucks that would be great candidates for such builds. I'm not really into cars, so you're not likely to see me building a car kit seriously. This is about as close as I'll get. Though I might build a truck someday, one without guns, probably after the one with guns. I hope this video has been interesting and helpful, or at the least mildly entertaining. I do hope it inspires people to make their own crazy conversions. I guess a lot of people who play orcs in 40k already do this kind of thing, which is pretty cool. Do share if you've got any of your own creations. As always, if you have any comments, questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. If you like the videos I make, be sure to subscribe to both this channel here and to my other channel, a link to which is in the description below. If you really like what I do, you can support me via Patreon. A link to that is also on screen and in the description. Thanks for watching. Farewell.